The conversations and information provided are not intended to substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
The opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not reflect the view of Humana Military or the Department of Defense.
Welcome to the Operation Within podcast, where we talk about health and a deeper sense of well-being.
Operation Within is a collective initiative to optimize holistic health matters and nourish within community, within self, and within family.
Thank you for joining the conversation on Operation Within podcast. We are your hosts, Mel
and Marty, and our conversations are real, they're raw, and reflective.
These conversations offer meaningful dialogue on experiences within the military community, oriented to empower and strengthen health and vitality in our communities who serve.
We want to give a special thanks to Humana Military and our partners who have brought Operation Within to life.
Let's dive in. Welcome back to Operation Within. It's Mel, and I'm here with David Holland, who is the owner of Longtab Brewing here in San Antonio, Texas. David is a retired Green Beret who served 20 years as an 18 Delta and another 10 years as a Special Forces Warrant Officer. David has deployed to Central and South America, Central Asia, and to the Middle East, and today owns and operates Longtab Brewing Company, which is dedicated to the history of Green Berets. David, I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Yes, and I would love to hear, and if you want to share just a little bit of your military background and your experiences over the years.
Yeah, so I joined in 1988. It's a long time ago. One of my close friends in high school, who I still keep in touch with today, had joined a year before me, and I saw what he was doing. You know, he was traveling to foreign countries and jumping out of airplanes and all that stuff, and I was like, I want to do that too. That looks cool. And so I did. You know, after I graduated high school, I joined. It was a guard unit, you know, 20th there in Huntsville, Alabama, and my unit was actually in Decatur. It was about 30 minutes away. And went to basic training at Fort Bliss, and then went to AIT here in Fort Sam. It was a 91 Bravo course, like basic medic course back then. And then went to jump school, and then went to SF selection, and thankfully passed. And then went to, back then SF school was really just 3 basic phases. It was like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So I did phase 1 in 1989, and that was all at Fort Bragg. It was like small unit tactics, patrolling, survival, air operations, you know, a myriad of things. And then after phase 1, came back to Fort Sam when the medic course was still taught here. In fact, the building that it was taught in is still standing, which is kind of crazy. It's like old, you know, pre-World War II barrack building, you know.
It's Fort Sam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I spent a year here, and then went back to Fort Bragg to do Med Lab, and which is, you know, you do some of the more advanced stuff. And then the middle of that was an OJT that I had to do at Fort Carson, which was, you know, a month or so long, where you just work in different departments around the hospital, and then in the evenings in the emergency room, and it was a blast. And it was Fort Carson, Colorado in the winter, and there was snow everywhere, and you know, so it was a lot of fun. And then once I finished the Med Lab, then you transition into phase 3, which is Robin Sage, and that's where you do all your unconventional warfare training. And you know, a lot of the beers that we have, you know, are named after, you know, some of the stuff in some of the stuff that we did in phase 3 in Robin Sage. All the Pineland stuff, you know, comes from that. And then, you know, spent, you know, all of 20 years as an 18 Delta on an SF team, which is pretty rare, at least it's not so rare in the in a guard unit, but it's extremely rare on active duty. That you spend more than 7 or 8 years on a team before they push you up, to do other more boring things.
Well, and
at
for
the
for
company
those
or battalion level.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, 18 Delta is a Special Forces medic.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
It's incredible.
yeah. It's a hard course. I'll do a little brag and say I think it's the hardest one. At least when you combine academics and physical ability, it's definitely one of the harder ones you can do. But yeah, and then once I got to a team, we did deployments down to all over Central and South America, and then we did a little bit up in Eastern Europe, for a little bit, and then did some in Central Asia, and then after 9/11, we did. Of course, my team, same team I'd been on for a couple of decades, did a deployment to Afghanistan in 2002, 2003, and then I came back and joined the 19th here in San Antonio, and then went to Warrant Officer School. So back to Fort Bragg, for another 3 months or 2 months, or can't remember how long it was, and then spent a little bit of time on an ODA here, and then went back to the 20th and retired out of that. I worked at the ASD, which is a kind of a group headquarters level asset where we do a lot of training. SODIC, sniper school, advanced urban combat, all that kind of stuff.
That's awesome.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell, I guess.
30 years in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, and with so much experience and with where you're at today with the brewery, and I know we're going to go into your story with that and, the focus on the history of Special Forces, I'm sure that the travel and different experiences and the training, like you said, really equip the insight of with the beers that you guys create. And if you want to share a little bit about Longtab as well, I'd love to hear.
Well, I've always loved beer, and even on all these deployments, my team, and I'm sure it's true in a lot of other teams too, but our team specifically, really loved to find whatever country we were in, we're always work hard and play hard, So after the work was done, we tried to find a place to find some good local beer, and that was just kind of part of it. We were sort of beer fanatics, and that was just kind of a thing we did. It wasn't anything that we highlighted. It was just it was a natural thing,
Well, and I think about whether it's beer or even coffee, there's just something about how it holds space.
Mm-hmm.
It's like from the moment it's poured into the glass or you have your cup of coffee, while you're drinking it, it's like in this moment, we're not going anywhere, but being here in community or in maybe like, especially with coffee, there's like a serenity of just being in your space until the end of the mug. And so, of course, my yoga, mindfulness background, it's like, and these things like coming together around beer really fosters that presence. It's like from the top of the cup to the bottom, attending this moment with people. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. There's a saying, that beer makes friends, so I agree with that. But when Natalie and I first met, I was drinking a Guinness and she asked for a sip. And, back then, and even today, I don't know, Guinness is typically not a beer that, at least in my experience, that women reach for, so I was really kind of taken aback that she wanted, number one, a drink of my beer, and I just met her, and number two, that she wanted to drink a Guinness, and so that made a big impression on me, and I was like, wow, she likes beer, this is good. So
that's so funny, and if the story of how the brewery even came about is with you and Natalie, and I'd love to hear that story. It's such a good story.
Well, yeah, the whole thing wouldn't exist without her for sure. And, it sort of, it was one of the silver linings of an unfortunate event of her being diagnosed with cancer. And, she was at home, and, was pretty sick, couldn't travel, and she got a catalog in the mail. And so she was flipping through it, trying to figure out something to buy for me for Father's Day, because I was overseas getting ready to come home. And so she bought it. She goes, "Oh, this is a beer kit. This looks cool." So she bought it, and the next sequence of events is up to controversy or there's some controversy behind it because I think it only sat in the closet for 6 months. She said it was a year and a half. So I don't know. She's probably right.
Father's Day gift, yeah.
She's usually right about everything. But nevertheless, I mean, I broke it out and brewed it, and it was terrible.
And was this while you were still in, right?
Yeah, I was still in. Yeah, I wasn't very active in my unit, not as much as I used to be. The first 20 years, I mean, I just lived and breathed it, and then the second 10 years, it was just like this slow transition into doing something else. But yeah, so she bought the beer kit. I brewed it, and it was terrible, and I felt defeated. I was like, "There's got to be a way to do this better," So I bought another beer kit. It was, a little bit better, and then I went all in, and I spent a bunch of money, because that's what you do when you get into beers. You spend a bunch of money, and so I bought a bigger brewing system, like a big stand, with like pumps and everything, because as the brewing got more intense, I was taking over the kitchen. And so Natalie's like, you got to get out. I need some room to cook, So she's like, kicked me out of the kitchen, and I went in the garage. And of course, I didn't have an oven back there, so I had to have a way to heat things and cool things. And so I bought this bigger brewing system, and then the beer just kept getting better and better. And, my undergraduate degree is in architecture, so, by proxy, you get this education in graphic design and presentation and all that, right? Because you're trying to sell an idea. And, or you're trying to sell something to people that you don't, that they may not know that they want or need, That's the magic of an architect. So I would make these labels, and I was like, it'd be kind of cool if we did something based on SF. And so I started making these SF themed labels, and I would just post it like on my personal, Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And next thing you know, people are asking me, where can I buy this? Where can I buy this? And he was like, you can't. It's in my garage, it's in a kegerator in the kitchen, and I would mail bottles to my old teammates, and I'd say, give me some good feedback. And they're like, oh my God, this is delicious. This is so cool. And so, this whole thing developed into a business idea. And then one day, Natalie and I just decided to go for it. And so, that same idea of making beer dedicated to SF history has remained unchanged. And to me, it's one of the most exciting things about doing it, because, this June 19th of this year will be SF's 70th birthday. So I got 70 years of history to pull from.
That's amazing. One thing too, that when I listen to your story and I see how you've exemplified your passions, and that we had a conversation before this podcast episode about stepping into business and not having all these business degrees or all these things. It's just the passion, the love for it, moving you forward, and this openness to learn as you go. As you were getting started, did it come up for you like where you doubted yourself or you were struggling with that transition? Because this was also as you were getting out of, or retiring, right?
Right.
If you want to share a little bit about that, because I think that's something a lot of people can relate to.
Right. I think, for me, everything that I had read, because I had read all sorts of like books and stories about people who started breweries, that was all. And, everybody's circumstances and stories are different. But when you boil it down to just the basic things that you need to start, and it sounds kind of cliche, but a business plan is the thing you have to do, because it's, it's a cathartic way to flush out all of your ideas, both from a conceptual standpoint, from a business mission standpoint, and also from a financial standpoint. Like, how realistic is this? Can I make a living doing it? And so, you have to flush all those things out and be realistic. And then, that's the tool that you use also to not only, educate yourself on what it is you're trying to do, but it's also the tool that, at least in, if you're going for like an SBA loan or you're trying to recruit investors, it's the tool that you're going to use to convince other people that you've got your game together.
Well,
and so, business plan is number one. You got to do it.
Even if like you're not sure where you're taking it, it's like the exercise of it too. Because if you look at a model of a business plan, it's going to get your mind thinking about things you probably weren't thinking about.
That's right. Yeah.
Because I think about there's so much out there for veterans and transition, and I also think about this related to military spouses, or if anybody's listening to this and it's kind of like you're ready for a change and you want to step into something that you're passionate about. The first steps are, a lot of times the world can make us feel like we have to have all these qualifications, or you need to have all this amount of money or these different things to be able to step into that. But until you start to make the actions to explore what is it that you're even passionate about. I do an exercise with my trainees, and especially with professional development, to get them to think about the top things that they're passionate about, the top things that they're good at. Because a lot of times, you talk about when you first brewed beer, it wasn't very good. But it was a skill you developed. So also our skills, what are things that you've developed? Even if it's not related to your career, that there could still be something there that you can create from it.
Right. Yeah. If there's something that I don't know how to do, thankfully, we live in a world where you've got access to so much information, and so it's, the challenge is sifting through all that. And, at least when I was starting to brew, there was a whole lot of resources, that you can pull from to learn how to do this thing at our scale, because brewing it, there's a lot of similarities between brewing 5 gallons and 500 gallons, in terms of the chemical processes, but there's, certainly a lot more considerations at a larger scale. But there's a ton of resources out there for, like home brewers to get good at doing beer at that scale. And so, I read the big jump for me is there's a guy by the name of Charlie Papazian, and he wrote a couple of books called How to Brew. And I was on a business trip, for work, and I was gone for like a week. And so I bought both his books. And so when I'd come back to my hotel room in the evening, I poured through both of those books, like cover to cover. And then when I got back home, I'm like, all right, I know what I did wrong. And so I made the adjustments, and it was like the springboard. It was like it gave me the confidence, to like, yeah, maybe I can't do this.
Well, it's true. Part of this is our ability to take the initiation to find the resources of if you want to learn how to create something. YouTube, Google, there's so much stuff out there.
They're your friends.
Yeah, even with business, because that's something that I find when I have conversations with people about how I've gotten with my business, it was I always say that a lot of the mistakes I made, it was tuition. Like when I had it, I was like, oh, I got to pay this money. It was tuition because I'm learning a lesson. It's a lot of, I think part of the entrepreneurial resilience is your ability to reframe and look at things as possibility versus blocks, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something you have to do at least, like Longtab, we opened up our doors January of 2020, so it was exactly 66 days before we got told to shut down. And so, if you want to talk about an exercise in reframing, that's it, because we had to immediately switch from a taproom-based system to 100% to go. We couldn't have anybody in the tap room. We had to, and I was like, wow. And, I know this is kind of contrary to what I said about the business plan. You can't, with the business plan, you try to, capture all the worst case scenarios. Well, a global pandemic was certainly not one of the worst case scenarios that I had considered. But, to your point about reframing, that's exactly it. It's like, okay, this is what we can't do. This is what we can do. how can we restructure this and keep the doors open, and keep, as many employees employed as much as possible. And so we did. And one of the big things was expanding our online presence, and making us more accessible because, before that, our website was just very basic. It was like, here's some pictures of cool beer, we brew beer for Green Berets. Here's our phone number, that was about it. To literally, I pulled 2 straight all-nighters and figured out how to build a website to sell beer online. And it really was, it really was like 2 full all-nighters. And then finally we launched it, and it was the number one key to our ability to, to pivot on these, crazy directions that we were getting from the state level on what we could and couldn't do.
You're making me think of a book I read called Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. It's about Stoicism. And a lot of the concept is the obstacle is the way. So when the obstacle shows up, because you would have never looked at the possibility, like the push to go global, or I guess national even, right? Like to push to do those things wouldn't happen without the restrictions that came upon it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, that a lot of people will give up on things really fast because it didn't work out the way they envisioned, versus looking at the path of as an entrepreneur, and I like to say with our work, it's like you're creating things to bring to the world. You're creating experiences, you're creating ideas and memories for people to have.
Right.
That it's really about our ability to co-create with the path that unfolds. Because like you said, a business plan probably wouldn't capture like the scenario of a global pandemic. But I think that the self-referral and the maintenance within yourself of, I'm going to keep learning, like to have that initiative to learn more and like expand, it's in that co-creation. So when there's a no, you're able to see where the yeses are and detach from this, like it had to be this way. Because I think that's a huge thing for businesses from the pandemic, is that we got to do it differently, but for a lot of people it expanded things.
Right. Yeah, like all those changes that we made early on, as a response to the, the shutdowns and COVID restrictions and all that, we kind of approached it in a way, well, it was kind of a 2-pronged approach. One of like the major efforts that we made, at least for me, I wanted them to be enduring. I'm like, when all this is over, I want this to be a tool that's set up that's going to survive, post-COVID, right? I don't want to invest so much into something that's temporary, because that's a waste of time and money.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we experimented with a few other avenues that were growing alongside it. A lot of the the big delivery services, really kind of, they exploded, and during COVID, like I don't know if I can say their name, but all the major delivery services, that was huge, and so we wanted to be, on those, and so we did for a short period of time, and then, but all the online presence that we did, like being able to buy our beer online, whether it's beer for pickup or delivery, or the shipping of swag all over the country, all of that is still in place today, and it was all developed in response to COVID. So we wanted to. So it was time well spent, so I think, when you look at those obstacles, you got to figure out, okay, how am I going to get past this? But then, I don't want to waste my time and have to backtrack and change something.
What is it that there's most opportunity in crisis? Like never miss the crisis. I don't know. Yeah. There's a fancy way to say it, but the concept that it's going to teach you how to do things better. And, no one equips. You cannot never be prepared enough for what we think life will bring. So that's why presence and going one step at a time, and then, I need to figure out how to do this with my website. Did you just Google, was it, or did you pay for a program? I
kept clicking until it looked right.
Yeah. You just figure it out. And
I had a little bit of experience, in like when websites were first a thing, when I was in college in architecture school, I taught myself HTML. I bought a book.
Was it on MySpace? Do you remember how MySpace had
Oh,
the
this is
H2?
way before
Oh, way
MySpace.
before.
Oh my God. This is way before MySpace.
Tell my age.
Yeah. MySpace was not even a thing yet. And, so I bought a book and actually got commissioned by the School of Architecture to develop their first website.
Wow.
So I got $500 for it.
That's wow.
Should have charged
I
a lot
know.
more. Now people get like
royalties.
$50,000, for a website. So it's crazy.
Well, but again, it's like these tools. Even if you have no experience with websites, so the way today is, it's just really a little bit of Googling and YouTubing, and it's more of our fear, I think, that stops people from learning and trying things as they go. And one of the big relevance of this conversation is going back to when people are in that transition and are ready to start something new, how even the quote that if you do what you love, you're not going to work a day in your life. But we are very programmed we have to be validated and approved, or we need to have these qualifications,
right?
Or someone needs to tell me what to do, especially in the military culture, and these passions and things that are existing within you. Is there potential for you to bring a new idea and something beautiful to the community that you're in? Like how you brought this amazing brewery that honors the history of Special Forces, but you don't see that everywhere. Like, this is so unique.
Yeah. When I started doing it, I searched everywhere. I'm like, there's got to be somebody doing this. As many breweries. I mean, we were just coming off of the biggest craft beer explosion in the United States. 2013 through 2016 or whatever. It was crazy. Double-digit growth every year, and then finally, it kind of stabilized and flattened out. Which, some people looked at it as like, oh man, you missed the explosion. And I'm just like, I would rather enter into a mature market, not one that's overhyped and then you overbuild and oversell. And then next thing you know, you're bankrupt, which happened to a lot of breweries when things slowed down. But yeah, I was really surprised that nobody was doing this. And it was a little bit, SF is a big organization, and, it's probably, I think it is, the biggest special operations segment, under the SOCOM umbrella is U.S. Army Special Forces. They're bigger than SEALs. They're bigger than a lot of the other specialized, direct action units. But, and so it was a little bit of, I guess, blind arrogance, saying, I'm going to do a brewery based on Green Berets, and I'm not going to ask anybody's permission, so it's a big thing. But, at the same time, when I decided to take this on, there's sort of a sense of obligation to do it right, so you got to honor the history, you got to honor the culture. And then if you're going to pull from that community for your benefit, then there better be a way to give back. And so that's where the dedication beers come in. It's like, yeah, we're doing all this cool stuff. We're educating people on SF history that would not otherwise know about even what they did or what they do. But we're also recognizing those that gave all. So.
Which is huge, because the things that you guys teach and share, because you do. I mean, I'll never forget the one time we came in and you just shared so much that of even just U.S. history, like to see how involved. These are things that are not necessarily sitting in the history books in people's high schools, right? Like these are real people's stories and so inspiring. Where do you hear these stories? So being able to hold a space for those memories to carry on is just so important.
Yeah, I was telling the other day, because they were asking about the names of the beers, right? And so I said, if you could do an Ancestry.com sort of a connection, I said every one of those names would be related. And I think that's pretty unique to our brewery, is that all the beers sort of have this historical tie to one another, whether it's named after, a specific unit, or it's some sort of, colloquial term, like Green Beret nap time or something, So it's, they all tie together. And we delve sort of outside of the direct influence or the direct connection to SF to some of the more significant elements of history. Like we're getting ready to release this beer called Striped Tigers, and it's the nickname of the Arvin Rangers from Vietnam. You know, I mean, their patch had this striped tiger, you know, that they wore. And so, you know, it's another beer that we're doing in series of these beers related to the Vietnam era of SF. And, you know, U.S. Army Rangers and Green Berets trained these guys. They worked alongside them. And so so there's a direct relevance there. Plus it looks cool. It's a cool label, you know.
A lot of the patches look really cool.
And a lot of the times, you know, I'll look at a nickname or a label or maybe an operation name or something like, oh, that's cool, and then we'll create a beer after it, you know. So I'm under no illusions that the beer comes first. You know, sometimes the name or the label will give us cause to create something for it, you know.
Well, and it's kind of makes me think of our conversation of even generational, like how the stories have been so hidden, especially from Vietnam era. And, you know, there's a lot of stories that aren't shared because that generation was very quiet about, you know, their experiences. Yeah,
that's true. And you know, and some of it is cultural and some of it is actually classification. You know, some of the missions that MACV SOG did in Vietnam, you know, was classified. You know, they couldn't talk about it. You know, some of the cross-border stuff that they did in like Laos and Cambodia was, you know, still held under the shroud of, you know, official government classification. And so when all that classification expired and, you know, all those documents are able to, you know, be released and talked about, suddenly there's kind of an explosion of information that's available. And there's a lot of those key figures that are out doing, you know, podcasts and writing books about it and everything. One guy that comes to mind is John Stryker Meyer. And this guy was running teams into Laos like in his early 20s. I mean, it was crazy what these guys are doing. You know, more recently, you know, in Berlin, you know, before the Berlin Wall fell, you know, the U.S. Army had the U.S. military had a detachment there called the Berlin Brigade, and there was a Special Forces detachment there called Detachment A, or Det A, right? And you know, all of their stories recently became declassified, and so on. I think it's sometime in April we're going to release a beer called Det A, and it's named after those guys. And so, you know, luckily, you know, one of my old bosses that I worked with in Iraq several years ago was a former Det A member. So I'm like picking his brain on, you know, labels and missions and all kinds of stuff. And now there's like a Det A website, you know, that's got all kinds of pictures and stories and just a fantastic resource. And of course, I'm digging through all this stuff looking for cool beer names, you know.
Well, and the history itself, I think there's lessons and aspects of it. I'm curious with all the different beer dedications that you guys have done, is there one that really stood out to you that really impacted you and or just was just something that you're really, really...
Yeah. Man, you know, they're all really different and they all kind of stand on their own. You know, because during the process of developing these beer dedications, you know, I mean, you're talking to, you know, Gold Star families, you know, you're talking to, you know, the mom of a fallen son or the, you know, the widow of a fallen husband. And it's like, you know, they all have, you know, different ideas and they all had different experiences and different circumstances. And, you know, even though we're doing a beer dedication for them, you know, I mean, I'm you know, won't even pretend to understand, you know, the emotions that they went through, you know. So we just try to do our best to, you know, to capture, you know, to kind of tell their stories so people can remember them and their sacrifice, and also, you know, make a good beer in their honor. You know, we try to make a beer that we think that they would like to drink, you know. And so
so that's amazing. You guys have the families involved when you do dedications.
From the start.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's I think that's probably, you know, because we get requests to do dedication beers a lot. You know, oh, can you do one for my buddy? Can you do this? And so, you know, it's you I always want to say yes, but I always tell them, make sure, if you've got some contacts with the family, put them in touch with us and let's start the discussion, because they get 100% say on what goes on the label, what kind of beer it is, and then the charity that it goes to. We just ask that it, support the community in some way, like an SF charity. And, most of the time it's, there's 3 major charities, and most of the time they'll pick one, one of the 3. But yeah, we haven't had any. They've all been wonderful and fantastic, and really the release day is very emotional, so it's, and also, I think, a lot of our staff, didn't come from military backgrounds. And so when we do these beer dedications and, there's 100 people in the brewery and they're all, in tears or whatever, and they're like, what the heck? This is a very, very different thing, that they've experienced at any other bar or brewery, when you, it kind of builds on that beer makes friends ideas, it can also do a lot more. Well,
this is amazing. And I've never heard of anybody doing that kind of model or being able to, I know for family members of those who have lost someone, to be able to see the memory carried on and in something that is dedicated around Special Forces or the work that they did. So that is so big and so cool. I want to, before we start wrapping up, I wanted to invite you to share the first thing is if there's anything as far as career path and like just advice for people who are in these transitions and desiring to do something that they're passionate about, maybe any resources or things that you want to share.
Yeah, one of the major resources that I think, a lot of people are benefiting from, DOD-wide, and certainly we've benefited twice so far, is the Skill Bridge program that is available to
Skill
Bridge. Yeah, it's a DOD-wide program where a service member can elect to work in a field that they want to work in after retirement. So, they pick a place, and they submit, I guess, a packet to their supervisors or whatever, and then they get approved, and then they're working still on active duty, right? They're not retired yet, but they're working 6 months in an industry that they want to transition into, and it's phenomenal. It's so good. I'm like, there's no way the government dreamed this up. It's like, this is a win-win for everybody, but yeah, it really is a fantastic program. And I would encourage everybody to look into that. We hired our assistant brewer, James, came off of that program. We had him. He came to us. It was about 7 or 8 months prior to retirement, and it took maybe a month or so to get all the paperwork set up, and then he started the program, and he worked for us for 6 months straight. And his last day was last September 30th, and then he was a Longtab employee on October 1.
That's amazing. And that's such a good way, too, to get experience. And it's almost like with the transition, having one foot into the civilian world a little bit, and then, you still have your other foot in the military culture. And being able to have that bridge for that, that transition is so versus just jumping right off into civilian. So that's amazing.
It is phenomenal. And then we had another guy come to us, and he worked for I think he only had about 4 months left, and before he retired, but he still did the Skill Bridge program with us. And so he primarily worked on the kitchen and the front of the house side of things, and was phenomenal. I mean, he was great. And then once he retired, he and his wife started a Korean food truck here in San Antonio. And so, he worked several months, in this food industry and gained a lot of insights on, food prep and ordering and all that kind of stuff. And now he and his wife are, he's retired and he's running a food truck, building off of what he learned while working at Longtab. So
that's awesome.
Which is super cool.
Is that something that businesses, even local businesses, can get involved in to support?
I know that you have to be a qualified venue for Skill Bridge, right? I don't think it could be. I suppose you presented the argument correct. You could probably do anything, but But I think, like for us, I think like, Mike helped James with the packet, and I can't recall how long it took, but we had to get approved as a site. First of all, his training plan had to be approved, and then we had to be approved as a site. And of course, our military background and what we're doing, all that stuff. I think it was kind of an easy sell.
I find that too with especially like education stuff, because I've done that on the side of with people wanting tuition assistance to come to our school. It's not that I go through like a military branch or the government. It's that the individual, like I'll help them with the paperwork to get our school qualified, but it's individual. So, and I think that's a good note for people to know, that just because something doesn't exist on the roster doesn't mean that you can't, be part of that process to get it still approved.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's actually a DoD SkillBridge website that people can go to, and I think they actually have like a searchable map of all the approved, SkillBridge sites, that are already in existence today, and a lot of it I think is, like it could be like IT or medical or engineering or something like that, but. There's also, some of the more obscure things like breweries, that you can get approved to do too.
That is awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And
it's been awesome.
Yeah, no, what you guys are doing is just incredible. We're very lucky in San Antonio to have you. But how can people from anywhere reach you guys? What is the place to contact and connect with you all?
So we've got a website, longtabbrewing.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, all the major platforms. We're even on TikTok, thanks to my kids. Says I have to have a TikTok account, I guess.
That is so funny.
Come by the brewery. We're at 4700 Timco West, number 105, over 410 in Bandera, just inside the loop.
Well, and you guys do different events, and I know Natalie does yoga there, and
every Saturday morning.
That is Bend and Brews.
Yeah, that's right.
That's awesome. Well, We're very grateful for you guys in our community, and thank you for sharing your story and your experiences that brought you here. For more information on Operation Within, you can check out millmindbody.com for the podcast episodes, along with resources, and also our Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. But thank you all for tuning in. If this episode was supportive for you, please share, and thank you so much for tuning in.